So where we left off was at the level of claim and evidence. So we've got the basic bones of this argument down. Okay, now I started wanting to add flesh and sinew. Okay, so we've got the basic bones of the argument down, claims and evidence. And so now the challenge is balancing claims and evidence so that you sound good, you sound smooth, and the speech is clear. And discussing evidence is vitally important. Because what you're doing when you're discussing evidence well is you're helping the audience distinguish between key idea and supporting idea, right? Remember back to the discussions we had about the difference between literacy and orality. Okay, the audience doesn't hold on to, they don't have a physical copy of your communique, they're only listening to you. So they can't hear boldface or italics. They certainly can't see what you've underlined in your speech. So you have to help us follow along and distinguish between high priority and low priority ideas by virtue of your performance. Claims and evidence provide that role. The claim is really what you want us to remember and understand. The evidence is there to support it. And this works across all types of scenarios. When I work with scientists or with business leaders, it comes down more often than not to talking to them about talking through evidence well, okay? Being able to distinguish between claim and evidence. It's an absolutely essential part of speaking clearly. So then the issue is, when you stand up to speak and you're doing these two-point impromptu speeches, how do you discuss that evidence? Well, remember we said that the role of evidence is to validate the claim. So when we're discussing evidence, your chief goal is to explain how and why the evidence supports the claim. Don't wander off on a tangent just talking about the evidence. You're talking about that evidence for a purpose, okay? And that purpose is explaining why this evidence advances this claim, why this evidence demonstrates this claim. And so in discussing that, you want to make sure that you're brief, because you're driven by that purpose. For any piece of evidence, there's probably 1,000 different things that you could say. You're not going to say all of those. You're going to say only the stuff that relates to advancing that claim. And this is going to provide you with a set of criteria for staying on topic. And does this really relate to the claim? If not, move on. Okay? So you are explaining the how and the why. And we can actually see this outside of this impromptu speech. So I'm going to show a video here in a moment. And it's an older video. It's Jay Allard, who was corporate vice president for Xbox when they were getting ready to roll out the Xbox 360 gaming console. And he's being interviewed, and he's being asked about controllers. He's talking about video game controllers. And what you're going to hear him say is he's got this claim, controls should be invisible. Now this is way back before the Kinect, and we are all dancing around in front of our TVs like idiots. But so when he says controls should be invisible, he means they should be intuitive. But you can hear how he's got a claim and two pieces of evidence. But listen to how he tacks back and forth between the claim and the evidence. He's got the claim, he'll discuss the evidence a little bit, tie it back to the claim, move on to a little bit more evidence, tie it back to the claim, and wrap up the entire point. Okay? And that's what we're going to be aiming for. That's what we're going to be working on specifically in this lecture here. So let's go ahead and take a listen to Jay Allard talking about the need for controls to be invisible.
I think controllers are incredibly important. And the important thing about controls is that it becomes invisible. To the extent that you have to think about controls, you get distracted. What I think would be a bad strategy with controls is to do something radical. We introduced Live Arcade this year. And I have a number of friends that aren't hardcore console passionate gamers that want to sit down and play 50-hour games. So I've downloaded all the Live Arcade games, got a big screen TV, and they want to play Puzzle Collapse in my living room. Simple game. It's D-pad and A. For you and for most of your readers, it's no big deal, right? For most of my friends that don't play console games, they're looking down. They're looking down. They're trying to find the A button because it's not the home keys for them. So I think what we have to do is we really have to embrace the fact that we're starting to standardize on controls. It's starting to become invisible. And just like the keyboard and the mouse, got to a certain point, all the capabilities were there. Then we locked on it. We're not moving the letters around, guys. We're not moving the function keys. Numeric keypad is laid out a certain way. We've come to a place now where game controls, I think, are very, very good, and we want to make them more invisible. So my emphasis is less on radical innovation. My emphasis is more on really becoming truly invisible so that you can be immersed in the experience.
So what's going on in there is you want to be able to have a structure to how you move through the point. So when I coached speech, competitive speech, I coached with a guy named George Lemaster, absolutely wonderful speaker, wonderful speech coach, and he would talk about this in terms of saying for each claim, you wanted to state it, explain it, prove it, conclude it. Now, you've probably seen that elsewhere. I've certainly heard that when talking about writing a paragraph. But for each one of your claims in this impromptu speech, you can think in terms of state it, explain it, prove it, conclude it. Okay? And that has you relating the claim to the evidence. Let me unpack each one of these. So first off, state it. Just give us the claim, your key idea, the thing that if we were taking notes, we had better write down. Okay? So in the clip we just watched, Jay Allard's idea was controls should be invisible. Okay? And since that is of a higher priority than the support that's going to come after it, as a delivery note, it should probably be slower, and you should probably throw a pause in before and after that claim. And I'll demonstrate this here in a moment. State it. Explain it. Spend a little bit of time unpacking the evidence and priming us for the evidence. Spend a little bit of time unpacking the claim and priming us for the evidence. So you've stated it, and then you've got, sometimes I refer to these as buffer sentences. You're building a bridge between that claim and that evidence. And auditorially, we've heard the claim, and as it's sinking in, you're just elaborating on it. You're not immediately jumping to the evidence. You're just sort of unpacking that claim a little bit, giving us time to process it so that when we fully understood it, then you're hitting us with the evidence. Okay? Here, too, you would probably also, in many cases, preview the support. I'm going to ask you to do that in the impromptu. Just say, I can think of 2 reasons why this is the case, or 2 cases of this. So then you get into the actual evidence. Okay? Prove it. Get into the details of the evidence and how they relate to the claim. So here's where the evidence is. On your note card, you've got probably a line for the claim, and then you've probably got a couple of lines for the evidence. So if you looked at the card, it looks like all your time should be spent with evidence. No, we want to get to the evidence, but you got to walk us through context. We got to know why this evidence is coming and how it's going to relate to the claim that you're doing. State it, explain it, prove it. Here's where you're just walking us through the evidence. But then conclude it. Walk us back out of the point. Reinforce the claim, reestablish the claim, and reinforce its relationship to the thesis. So once again, in that Jay Allard clip, it was controls should be invisible. He talks through one example and sort of illustrates that idea. He talks through another example and illustrates when controls are invisible and when they're not invisible, intuitive and not intuitive. And then he telescopes back out, and the last few sentences are, so in the end, I really think that we should get to a point where controls are just more intuitive and increasingly more and more invisible. He restates the claim. You may have heard in all your writing instruction up to this point, don't repeat yourself. And that makes sense if I'm holding on to your essay and I can reread the lines or I can underline the important thing. Your audience is trapped by the flow of time. They can't rehear what you said 10 sentences ago unless you say it again or they recorded you. So here's an opportunity. You walk us into the point, state it, get us to the evidence, explain it, prove the point by discussion of the evidence, and then you telescope back out for concluded. So I'm gonna demonstrate this. So last week, at the last lecture of last week, I said that MOOC providers shouldn't pressure universities to offer university credit for MOOC classes. So let's say this time I'm going to argue the opposite. So yes, they should. Why? Because establishing credit strengthens the quality of MOOCs. And then I've got 2 pieces of support here. And universities can always reject the claim. And I've gotten my 2 pieces of support here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and go through this point. And for each one of these, I'll highlight where I am in the state it, explain it, prove it, conclude it. Okay?